All right. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get the ball rolling then. Before we get into the main agenda, I just want to quickly reiterate that I already posted this on the forums recently. December won't be having an end of month governance call, largely because of the holidays. Governance activity is usually pretty slowed down during that time. Yeah, the next gov call will be at the end of January. So continuing the last Thursday of every month schedule. I think it's like the 29th of January this time. And the second main thing on the boardroom side is that I wanted to give a quick update on the delegation initiative. So last month, Chitty, Jarrell, and Fachucky all received endorsements from existing super delegates. So they've now fulfilled all the requirements to become super delegates themselves. So yeah, so I'm really happy to have them on board. Onboarding with the Moonwell Foundation is the next step that should happen pretty soon. And so yeah, so that will officially fill our 5 available super delegate slots for the time being. I'd still like to encourage anyone who's interested to still go ahead and become the junior delegates or mid-tier delegates, just because there's always a possibility that the makeup of the 5 super delegate slots could change, or the number could potentially be increased in the future. So yeah, so just check out the governance docs if you want to learn about more about the requirements. And with that out of the way, the main agenda that we have today is essentially just our usual lineup of speakers, followed by the community Q&A. So yeah, I won't take up any more of your time, and I'll throw it to Luke straight away if you're ready, Luke.
Yeah, good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yep.
Thank you for attending the governance call for the last one of the year. I'm really excited to kind of give you a quick update on all the things happening in the Moonwell and Mamo ecosystem and give everyone an update on recent events. So first of all, I just want to start with I guess, the not so good news is that, in October, on October 10th, obviously there was a liquidity crisis across many crypto markets. The automatic deleveraging on Binance went a bit crazy and caused prices to be printed for Arrow, Morpho, and virtual tokens that were invalid. And, we covered this on a previous governance call, but I wanted to give a quick update on the bad debt repayment. So after the passage of the governance proposal that withdrew some of the reserves, a virtual repurchase was made, and we've added virtual back into that market so that we can help offset the bad debt. That was done with USD coin. And so we used a lot of the USDC protocol revenue that was, voted on through governance to repay the bad debt in the virtual market. Now, there is still a lot of ETH reserves that are going to be used to repay the bad debt. But in order for that to happen safely, we have to get an audited smart contract for a WETH unwrapper. It's kind of a technical term, but we wanted to make sure that before we put a governance proposal up for that we had an audited smart contract unwrapper so that when the WETH gets unwrapped properly, we don't end up losing any funds. And so that has just put a bit of a delay on the full bad debt repayment. And we hope to finish that audit, actually just finished this week. So we hope to actually have a governance proposal live next week that will withdraw additional protocol revenue on the ETH side and use that to help repay the bad debt. We're prioritizing bad debt repayment in the virtual and CBXRP markets first, as those have a higher interest rate. And so we want to avoid accumulating more bad debt through the interest rates being high. So I just wanted to give an update there. The bad debt repayments continue to happen. And, as the community voted on, we're using protocol revenue to offset the bad debt. And we think this will allow us to fully offset this over the coming months. But that's, just wanted to give a quick update there. I will ask Anna to share some of the exact numbers for virtual that was repaid. But the good news there is that due to the price of most of the altcoins being down against the dollar recently, this allowed us to accumulate virtual at a pretty good price and then repay it back into that market. So that's sort of the bad news out of the way, but I wanted to also talk about next steps for Moonwell. Some of you may have seen a Twitter thread that I put out. Moonwell contributors met up in the San Francisco Bay Area a few weeks ago, and we worked on a Moonwell and Mamo unified roadmap, and really just wanted to give some updates there. First of all, our North Star here is to create a unified agentic finance platform that can merge the reliability and the depth of Moonwell with the social, personalized, and the gamified experience of Mamo. And the goal here really is to create a single intelligent financial companion that can help everyone save, borrow, invest, and play within a conversational multi-channel interface. And I know that all of this is built on top of the Moonwell protocol, but we really think that we have a best-in-class agentic finance experience and we want to continue to add the functionality into that interface and make it even easier to use. And our goal has always been to bring the most powerful financial tools to everyone in the world, regardless of your ability level. And we see Mamo as an extension of that. And so what we met to discuss was really a way to kind of how do we unify, how do we bring the best features of Moonwell itself into the Mamo interface? And also, how do we continue to advance and improve the Moonwell protocol itself? And so the first thing we talked about was really how do we improve the foundation and the core of Moonwell because everything is built on top of the Moonwell protocol. And a lot of this has to do with governance and contracts. So the first thing we worked on was, remediating some of the bad debts with reserve management. And we actually have an improvement that just went through audit that will allow us to do the reserve auctions with the ETH markets. And the next thing we talked about is how do we make our price feeds more resilient, given we've had two major failures on the Chainlink feeds in the last month in October. And so we're moving to a capo price feed, a correlated asset price feeds, which should allow us to be more resilient by using exchange rates and not suffer from excess liquidations. And we're also researching DEX price anchors so that if the exchange rate that Chainlink is reporting is too far off from the DEX price that the token is selling for, we should fall back to the DEX price because that's the price that matters. And we currently have a governance proposal going live to upgrade the Oracle extracted value price feeds, so that we can capture more value at the Moonwell protocol. And I'll let the governance proposal speak for itself. You should see that going on chain pretty soon here, maybe early next week for that one. And then we're also working on some infrastructure upgrades, looking at migrating the multi-chain governor. This is the governor that is the locus of governance from the Moonbeam network to Base or to Ethereum mainnet. I'd love to hear if the community has any input on where where that should take place. So, for example, the governor, in case you're not familiar with it, is where all the votes are collected from Base, OP mainnet, and Moonbeam, and then they're tabulated, and then the governance proposals pass or fail, and systems can be upgraded. I'd love to hear thoughts from the community on whether it makes more sense to migrate the governor to mainnet or to Base. And I think there's pros and cons to both. If we migrate the governor to mainnet, that will allow us to eventually launch the Moonwell protocol on Ethereum mainnet. Now, gas costs are higher on mainnet, but people will still be able to vote on Base and OP mainnet. So gas cost to vote will still be very small. So that shouldn't be an issue. Migrating to Base is a simpler migration and allows us to just simply support the features as is on Base, but it also allows us to support additional features. In both these migrations, we're looking at building additional features. For example, the ability to borrow against your staked well on the new Morpho isolated markets and retain your voting rights. So that's something that will exist regardless of whether the governor migrates to Base or Ethereum mainnet. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on, is it worthwhile to migrate governance to Ethereum mainnet, which would give us the opportunity to launch the Moonwell protocol on mainnet in early 2026. Another thing we've been working on is we deprecated the Moonriver deployment in the sense that Moonriver is now in a withdraw repay only mode. So if you have funds you've borrowed or supplied on Moonriver, I would encourage you to just consider repaying those loans or withdrawing your supplied funds. That is, the Moonriver deployment will exist forever, but it is no longer able to be actively borrowed against. And then as far as, future for what we're building besides the core, on the Mamo side, we really want to bring some of the features from Moonwell into the Mamo agent. For example, we're going to support, we already support today Mamo inside the Base as a mini app, the Base app, and we want to expand to World Chain. The World Chain mini app, I think, has millions of monthly active users, and we'd love to kind of bring Mamo to World Chain. We also want to build the Moonwell and Mamo Visa card into the Mamo app, which would allow us to launch new Visa cards that could have, Mamo on them and Moonwell logos, and allow them to operate in two different ways. One is spend mode, which would spend your USDC account, and another was borrow mode, which would allow you to just simply borrow against your Bitcoin or Ethereum on every swipe. On the Mamo side, also, we're working on Ethereum accounts. Those should land really soon. And then we want to continue to build out, basically want to bring the best features of Moonwell into the Mamo experience, the ability to borrow from within Mamo. We're building right now a native chat experience into the app so you don't have to use Telegram anymore. And then throughout the next, quarters of 2026, we expect to build more and more features into the Mamo app. so that we can kind of unify the experience across both Moonwell and Mamo. And that's a challenge that we're kind of leaning into is how do we unify these two experiences? How do we make it so that for the Mamo users, they have the ability to do simple financial transactions like supplying, earning, borrowing, and using the card. And then also for the power users on the Moonwell side, how do we continue to expand their abilities there as well? So I've been talking for a while. I'm going to stop talking and let the agenda move on. But I think there's a Q&A towards the end where I'll come back and I'll answer some of your questions provided by the community. But just wanted to say going into the holiday season, that we're really grateful. I'm really personally thankful for all of the support that you've given us. I know the market conditions have been pretty terrible recently, and everyone is kind of down bad. But I think that in general, I'm really optimistic about going into this holiday season. I just want to wish you all a great holiday, and whatever you celebrate. And I just want to let you know that everyone on the Moonwell team is really grateful and thankful for all of your support over the years. And we're really excited and optimistic about 2026 and the opportunities ahead of us. So I just wanted to let everyone know, I wish you a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate, and let you know that, we're going to continue building into the 2026 new year. And we're really optimistic about the future and what we're building together. So thanks everyone for your support and hope you have a great holiday season.
Great. Thanks, Luke. Darren, you ready?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Luke. So I guess from my end, I think I just want to go over some of the governance proposals that were released this month beyond the beyond Anthias's recommendations. So we had MIP 32, which kicked off the wind down process as Chainlink begins deprecating some of their price feeds on the Moon River network. The purpose for this was to prevent users from opening new positions while still allowing existing users to repay, unwind, and exit. I think Luke has largely touched on a lot of this, but ultimately it's to reduce risk as the market approaches possible shutdown and to ensure user safety without unexpected exposure. Then we also uploaded MIP R33, which focused on tuning some of Moon River's reward parameters, and that was with the help of the Anthias folk. So that was reducing reward emissions just to better align with activity and avoid overpaying as deprecation of price feeds occurs. And to that end, there have been some announcements from Chris in the Discord about the deprecation of price feeds for Moon River as well. And then finally, MIP B52, which focused on the remediation of the bad debt that the protocol incurred from the Oracle problem situation and from 1010. So far we've had about 812,000 virtual in bad debt covered, and that in a notional amount that is about $769,000. So that's a decent amount of the bad debt covered. I believe, like I want to say that that's like 25 to 30%. Um, and these actions were advised by the Anthias folks. So big shout out to them as well. To wrap things up, expect some future bad debt remediation proposals as some of those payments made to the markets will be tweaked in the coming months. We also, Luke touched on this earlier, but there are going to be some upgrades to oracles for next week. And this will happen to both the isolated markets and to the Moonwell core markets. You'll see that in a proposal relatively soon. But yeah, those are all the updates from the governance and just recapping what took place for this month. Thank you.
Awesome. And from there, Chris with Anthias, if you're ready.
Hey everyone, as always, thanks for having me, and I hope you guys can hear me. I would like to just give an update on the governance proposals we passed over the past month, specifically the risk parameter recommendations. So since there's no governance call next month, we'll also go over the most recent risk parameter recommendations that just went up to a vote a few days ago, and you can actually go and vote on that right now. But anyways, for November, our parameter changes starting with base, we increased the USDC multiplier from 0.072 to 0.08. And the reason we did this is we wanted to stabilize interest rates in the USDC market. We were noticing that as utilization went above the kink, rates would spike. And in order to stabilize rates, we just increased the bar rate at the kink. And so over the past month, we've seen particularly stable rates, and we're happy with these changes. Moving on, LBTC and TBTC, we decreased the collateral factors there from 85% to 84%. And the reason is all the Bitcoin derivatives on Moonwell they had a collateral factor of 85%, and we thought it was wise to distinguish CBBTC, LBTC, and TBTC to better capture the risk profiles of these different assets. Essentially, TBTC, LBTC, they have they're exposed to different tail risk, and they have different levels of DEX liquidity. And so in this first proposal, we decreased collateral factors for LBTC and TBTC. And in the most recent proposal, we also decreased further the collateral factor for TBTC. And for OP mainnet, we also amended the interest rate curves for USDT0 and DAI. And essentially what we wanted to do was just standardize the IR curves for stablecoins on OP mainnet. And so we just aligned those with USDC and USD. All right, and moving on to what's currently on the most recent proposal, mainly the biggest thing there is increasing the reserve factor for CBXRP, Virtual, and Arrow. So in these markets, there exists quite a bit of bad debt, and we just want to increase the rate at which reserves are accrued in those markets. So by increasing reserve factor, we can essentially increase the rate at which reserves are accrued. Additionally, I think I just mentioned this, TBTC decreased the collateral factor from 84% to 82%. And the reason is, compared to LBTC, secondary market liquidity for TBTC is a little bit worse. And so we're just quantifying the levels that we're seeing. Another thing that we proposed is amending the virtual interest rate curve. Essentially, we just wanted to bump the kink up a little bit more because given the amount of bad debt that was in that market, it was accruing interest as utilization was hovering slightly above the kink of 60%. So we raised the kink to 70% with the goal that interest there would be much lower. However, most recently, the USDC reserves were converted to virtual, and that brought utilization down anyways. And so it's kind of helping in both ways. So there's a much larger buffer between utilization causing like high interest rates there. And finally, on OP mainnet, we recommended decreasing supply and borrow caps for wrapped EETH. We noticed that essentially there's a large exit over the last month in wrapped EETH. Actually, over the last few months, as whales exited. And typically the landscape there was that people would supply wrapped EETH and borrow WETH and then loop it back into wrapped EETH. And essentially these positions, since there's wrapped EETH and ETH are essentially 100% correlated, they're not at risk of liquidation. And given the limited amount of DEX liquidity for wrapped ETH on OP mainnet, this was okay. However, the large caps that existed are now no longer filled. And so essentially anyone could come in and supply wrapped ETH and borrow, say, USDC, and these aren't like 100% correlated. And so there'd be a liquidation risk for that. So we want to manage that risk. And so we propose decreasing caps there. Like I mentioned before, the proposal for the most recent December recommendations are currently live. You can go vote for it. And that's all for me.
All right, thanks, Chris. The last portion here is the Q&A. I think, Darren, if you wanted to take over here, you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start for the Q&A, the first question, it comes from BTC Plug, and it is, what happens to the WELL tokens received as rewards from the Moonwell credit facility?
So for those that aren't aware, the Moonwell credit facility allows us, these are new isolated markets and a Moonwell ecosystem USDC vault built on top of Morpho primitives that allow us to borrow against the WELL token and MAMO tokens to fund future operations without selling tokens. And so far, these have been working remarkably well. We've been able to borrow just under $5 million to fund operations without selling any tokens. But this is a good question the BTC Plug is asking. Because there are WELL incentives on depositing into that vault, there have been tokens earned by depositors in that vault. And some of the people actually supplying are earning those tokens, the WELL tokens that were voted on as incentives. So far, Lunar Labs has earned some of those tokens, and we've simply used those tokens as more collateral to borrow against. We haven't sold any of those. Now, it's a good question as to what we should do with those tokens. But so far, that's basically what we've done is simply we claimed them once and then supplied them as more collateral to borrow against. Because we haven't sold any of those. But, I'd love to hear your feedback on what you'd recommend. I think it would be nice, actually, if there was a way we could add incentives to that vault and make certain addresses like Moonwell Foundation or Lunar Labs ineligible for those incentives. But in any case, we don't plan on using those incentives outside of just simply holding on to them and supplying more collateral. But I'd love to hear your feedback on whether that's a good idea or not. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. The next question comes from MDJU. What is the status of the bad debt? Is it repaid already, or when will it be approximately repaid? If not, are rewards capped because of that? And I know that you've answered this for the most part, but just wanted to circle back.
Yeah, great question. Okay, so first of all, I'm looking at the transaction where some about $765,000 of virtual was just repaid back to that market. This was the proceeds of USDC protocol revenue that was used to, buy back and repay the virtual bad debt. And as Chris mentioned earlier, I believe this reduces the bad debt by something around 25 to 30%. There's another significant repayment that's going to happen in the next week or two when ETH reserves or ETH protocol revenue is withdrawn and used to repay a lot of the bad debt. And so we're hoping that the bad debt can be repaid over the coming months. But a lot of the rate of how fast does it get repaid depends on how much protocol revenue Moonwell makes. If we have more borrowing demand in the coming months, the bad debt will get repaid faster. If we have less, then it will get repaid slower. And a lot of that depends on market conditions outside of our control. For example, will the Fed cut rates in December? That could have a boost, that could give a big boost to the crypto economy, which would mean more borrowing demand for leverage and helping rates go up. The OEV upgrades that we're releasing in the coming days that should also improve protocol revenue. So the rate of repayment is hard for me to estimate, but I hope we're able to repay it in the first half of 2026. Now, the second part of your question was related to the caps on staking rewards. Okay, so for those of you that aren't familiar, there's a governance proposal, I believe it's live right now, MIP X37, that will actually, for the first time, make the Moonwell token deflationary. And the way this happens, for those of you that aren't familiar, every month or every 4 weeks, as part of the liquidity incentive automation, there are reserve auctions. Now, reserves are simply the protocol revenue. That's revenue earned by the Moonwell protocol, the spread between the rate that lenders earn and the rate that borrowers pay is captured by the Moonwell protocol as revenue. And then that revenue in the form of USD coin, Ethereum, restaked ETH, et cetera, is used to buy back well through these reserve auction contracts. And this is a unique feature that only Moonwell has, to my knowledge. And so in the last 4 weeks, before X37 went live, there was something like around 30 million well bought back, which is a pretty significant amount, just over $250,000. And that well that was bought back at pretty low prices given the macro conditions, we put up a governance proposal, and this is an improvement to the automation that effectively caps the staking reward at 10%. If we would have distributed the entire amount of well that was bought back, the safety module staking rate would have been in the much higher, I think something like 30 or 40%. And so we heard your feedback on previous calls that you would love to see a lower staking rate. I think most of you in general would love to see a lower staking rate and take more well out of circulation. And so that's effectively what this proposal does, is it caps the amount of staking rate or staking rewards at 10%. And then all of that excess well is just held in reserves. Now, we're not burning it, but it's effectively out of circulation because it's no longer in the circulating supply. And so if you have a strong opinion on that, for or against, I would encourage you to vote on X37 if you haven't already. But effectively, just to answer the second part of your question, sorry for the long-winded answer, the cap staking rate is not related to the bad debt. It's simply because we generated a really good amount of revenue, in the last 4 weeks prior to that. And there was a lot of well bought back, and we wanted to improve the automation for liquidity incentives to incorporate this idea of a staking reward rate cap based on community feedback. So we think it's actually a really nice improvement in that, over the coming months, we hope to take more and more well out of circulation. And again, we're going to try our best to balance the repayment of the bad debt against using protocol revenue to buy back well. And I think that's something we're going to, look to the community for guidance on. Which one would you prioritize? Repayment of bad debt first over well buybacks. And I think it's going to be a tough balancing act, but we hope to incorporate your feedback into the automation tooling that basically generates these proposals for you or for us as a community.
Awesome. And last question, last but not least, An anonymous person asks, security and price manipulation. What has Moonwell done to prevent what happened in October from happening again? And again, I know you've touched on this for the most part, but yeah, this is just the last question.
Yeah, it's a great question too. I think the events in October, the 1010 event and the mispriced Kelp DAO restaked ETH have kind of shattered a lot of our previous assumptions about how secure Chainlink price feeds are. And in general, while Chainlink has served us well for over 3 years, I think many protocols, there were over 30 protocols, including large ones like Venus on BNB chain, that took on some minimal bad debt because of the mispriced assets on Chainlink. And so that's caused a lot of us to reevaluate how we think about these things and how we should secure these price feeds. And there are trade-offs all around. Chainlink is very lindy in the sense that they never have downtime, but because they weight the price on volume, that meant that all the volume being on Binance with Binance's automatic deleveraging, or ADL, going haywire. That meant that they were just printing prices that were wrong for some time, and that caused a lot of bad outcomes. So going forward, I mentioned in the roadmap discussions, the meetings we had a few weeks back here in San Francisco Bay Area, we talked about how to improve our price feeds. And there's a few ideas we have. For example, we've already improved the Kelp DAO restaked ETH by migrating from a market rate feed, the market rate feed that printed the bad price, to the exchange rate feed. And so that's already done. But we want to adopt a correlated asset price methodology where we basically look at the exchange rate. But if Chainlink ever prints a price that's above the actual contract exchange rate, what you can unstake your ETH for, we'll fall back to that price. So that kind of protects us against an outlier, like where Chainlink just prints the price that is absurd, and that would prevent future incidences like the Kelp DAO incident. And then, so that's one method of improvement. And then the other method of improvement we're researching is DEX price anchors. So, for example, we would use the Chainlink price most of the time, almost all the time. But if the Chainlink price is, above the DEX price by a few percent, then we fall back to the price that you can get it on Uniswap or Aerodrome. And this would prevent, basically MEV bots from manipulating and incurring bad debt like happened on 1010. So those two improvements are areas of open research. Moving to like a correlated asset price methodology where we use the exchange rate, but not if it's above 1-to-1. And having a DEX price anchor. Those are two areas of active research, and we hope to have some improvements in the first quarter of 2026.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Luke. And thank you, Darren. Yeah, so we're approaching the end here. So speakers, feel free to cut me off if you want to get in any final speaking points. And for everyone else, again, if you missed it earlier, the next call will be the end of January. Also look out for the Google form link that we'll post in the forums and here on X. You can submit your questions for the Q&A portion for the next call.
Yeah, I'd love to just add a closing comment. First of all, thank you for all your support. Again, happy holidays to everyone. And I'd love to hear your feedback on the most recent governance proposals capping the well staking emissions at 10%. If you think this is a good idea, maybe it's too low, maybe it's too high. I'd love to hear from you. And then also on the adding functionality to the Mamo side, things like a new Mamo card that you could borrow against your Bitcoin with, or spend from your Mamo USDC account. And I'd also love to hear about ideas people have for thoughtful integration of features like borrowing into the Mamo app. Also, we're looking for ways to unify the two apps into a single experience and a single brand. So there's not two things. If you have ideas on how to unify things, please share them. Unifying the tokens is one thing, but unifying the app experience is more important, I think. And so we want to make sure that, we can kind of meet people where they are, whether they're a new user that came in through Mamo or whether they've been using Moonwell for years. We'd love to hear your ideas there. And then also just to wrap up, 2 weeks from today, I believe, 2 weeks from yesterday, there is going to be a big Coinbase event on December 17th. I would encourage you all to watch that event. I don't really have any inside knowledge, but really excited about that because I think you're going to see a lot of exciting announcements about the base ecosystem. And so I'd encourage you to tune into the live stream on December 17th and watch that. Hopefully there'll be some great news about Moonwell and Mamo and that. Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays.
All right. Thanks, Luke. If no other final points, that'll do it. All right. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.